hand reaches for a door, another hand tightens around a blade, and a woman in purple turns too late. She hears running, not soldiers, not guards, a young man. He crashes into the room like a child, not like an emperor, not like a rival, a child. He grabs her robe, pulls himself behind her, and then he says the words that will follow her for the rest of her life. "Mother, help me." The blades come anyway. One cuts through his body, one cuts her hand. But the worst thing in that room is not the blood. It is what happens after. Because the woman is not allowed to scream, not allowed to curse, not allowed to mourn. Her son is dying in her arms. And the man who ordered it will soon control what she is allowed to feel. This is not just the story of a murder. It is the story of the moment Rome learned that even a mother's arms could not protect blood from power. And after that room, nothing in the empire was sacred. Years before the room, their father gave them a rule. Not in Rome, not under marble, not in the safety of the palace. On a cold frontier, near the edge of the world, Rome thought it owned. Septimius Severus was dying in Britain. He had spent his life proving that the empire did not belong to the best man. It belonged to the man the army would obey. He had fought rivals, bought soldiers, crushed opposition, and dragged his family through the machinery of power until even his sons understood that a throne was not inherited. It was held every day against everyone. His elder son was Caracalla, hard, restless, military. A boy who grew into power like a knife grows into a hand. His younger son was Geta, close enough to the throne to be dangerous, close enough to their father's name to be impossible to ignore. The old emperor looked at them and saw what Rome had not yet seen. Two heirs are not twice the strength. Sometimes they are the beginning of civil war. So Severus left them 3 commands. 3 nails driven into the future: be harmonious, enrich the soldiers, despise everyone else. That was the inheritance. Not love, not duty, not brotherhood, a method, a warning, a map to survive Rome. But there was one person in the family who heard something else inside those words. A woman who knew both boys before Rome turned them into threats. She had watched them grow, watched them learn court silence, watched them smile when people were looking, watched them measure each other when they thought no one was. She understood the danger before the empire did, because she was not only Augusta, she was their mother, and she knew the truth mothers know first. One of them would not share. When Severus died in 211, Rome did what Rome always does after death. It pretended there was order. 2 sons, 2 Augusti, 1 dynasty. Coins could show them together. Officials could speak their names together. The Senate could bow to both, and the public language of the empire could still pretend that succession had worked. But inside the palace, every ordinary thing had changed its meaning. A meal was no longer just a meal. It was a test of who trusted whom enough to swallow first. A servant crossing from one wing to another was no longer just a servant. He was a possible messenger, a possible spy, a possible witness who might live or disappear depending on which brother won. Doors remained open too long. Guards changed posts at strange hours. A look held for half a second became information. Rome had 2 emperors, but the palace had become 2 countries. Caracalla occupied one wall. Geta occupied the other. And the woman in purple moved between them like the last bridge over a river that was rising every day. She arranged meetings, softened messages, smoothed insults before they became orders. She listened to the spaces between words. Because hatred does not always announce itself. Sometimes it changes the temperature of a room. Sometimes it appears in the way one brother stops using the other's name. There was even talk of dividing the empire. One brother in the west, one brother in the east. Clean political solution. A clean imperial wound. But divide Rome between 2 sons? And what are you really saying? That the father failed. That the house failed. That the family could only survive by becoming 2 enemy states. She resisted it. Not because she was naive. Because she understood the cost. Once Rome learned the empire could be cut between brothers, it would never stop cutting. So she kept trying. One room, one meeting, one more chance. And that is exactly what Caracalla needed. Not a battlefield, not a trial, not a public accusation. A room where Geta would come without his full guard. A room where fear would lower its head for 1 second. A room that belonged to their mother. Caracalla did not need Geta to trust him. That was impossible. He needed Geta to trust her. The invitation came wrapped in the shape of reconciliation, a family meet, a mother's request, a final attempt to end the hatred before the empire broke under it. Geta knew danger. He was not a fool. He knew his brother. He knew men in power do not suddenly become gentle because a mother asks them to. But this was the last neutral room in Rome, the last place where both brothers could appear without openly declaring that the Severan house was finished. So Geta went. That is the the trap. Not that he believed Caracalla, that he still believed there were limits. Limits to what a brother would do in front of their mother. Limits to what blood could become. Limits to what Rome would permit inside a family. He entered the room expecting danger. He did not expect execution. The woman waited. She had done this before, sat between them, watched the air hard, measured every silence. Caracalla arrived with the face men wear when the decision has already been made. Not rage. Rage is noisy. This was colder. This was a plan pretending to be peace. For a moment, the room holds 3 people, 1 mother, 2 sons, 1 empire. Then the door opened, and the men who enter are not diplomats. They are soldiers. Geta sees them. The body understands before the mind explains. He moves fast toward the only protection left. Her. He reached her, and for the first time, the witness has a name: Julia Domna, Augusta, wife of Septimius Severus, mother of Caracalla, mother of Geta. The woman who had tried to hold the dynasty together was now the place where the dynasty broke. Geta did not run to the throne. He did not run to the law. He did not run to Rome. He ran to his mother. He grabbed her robe, pressed himself against her, and in that final instinct, he became what power had tried to erase. Not co-emperor, not rival, not threat, a son. Then the blades came.
I had stood beside emperors. I had faced armies, senators, liars, flatterers. But in that room, I was only a mother with 1 hand full of blood.
Caracalla had not only killed his brother, he had killed him through her. That was the cruelty of the room. Geta's blood was on Julia's hands because Caracalla put it there. And now the empire would ask the impossible from her. Stand beside the surviving son. Do not mourn the dead one. Smile when Rome is watching, because grief in that palace had become treason. The murder ended quickly. The punishment did not. Geta was dead. But Caracalla still had a problem. A dead brother can become a memory. A memory can become pity. Pity can become accusation. So the empire did what frightened power always does. It tried to control what people were allowed to remember. Geta's name was cut from inscriptions. His face was broken from images. His statues were attacked. His supporters were hunted. The empire was not only removing a man, it was removing the evidence that he had ever been loved. Every stone became a witness. Every missing face became a confession. Every silence around his name became another order. And Julia had to live inside that silence.
They could cut his name from stone. They could break his face from marble. But no one could remove the weight of him from my arms.
Then the erasure widened. It moved from stone to people. Anyone too close to Geta became dangerous. Friends, servants, officials, men who had spoken his name with loyalty, women who had carried messages through the wrong corridors. The palace learned a new rule. To survive, you did not only obey Caracalla, you forgot Geta. And if you could not forget him, you learned to pretend you had. But Rome did not ask the question a mother would ask. What kind of son does this? It did not even ask the question a court would ask. Who is guilty? Rome asked the only question power truly cared about. Will the army accept him? Because in the empire Septimius Severus had built, legitimacy did not begin in the Senate. It began in the camp. Caracalla understood that better than anyone. His father had left the rule behind. Be harmonious. He had broken that. Despise everyone else. He had lived by that. But the third command remained. Enrich the soldiers. So Caracalla went where judgment could be purchased. Not to the mother whose robe was stained. Not to the brother whose name was being carved away. Not to the Senate pretending not to see. To the men with weapons. To the men who could turn murder into continuity. And the soldiers accepted. Coins could be paid. Promises could be made. Orders could continue. The empire did not stop because a brother had been murdered. It adjusted. That was the terror of it. Not that Caracalla killed Geta, but that after he killed him, Rome still functioned. Messages moved. Guards changed posts. Officials bowed. The army remained fed. And once the machine kept moving, the murder began to look less like a wound and more like a new arrangement of power. Rome learned something in that room. Not all at once. Not as a law. Not as a lesson carved openly into stone. It learned it the way empires learn their worst truths. By surviving them. A brother could be killed. A mother could be silenced. A name could be erased. And if the soldiers were paid, if the officials bowed, if the messages kept moving, then the crime did not have to look like a crime for forever. Blood could be rewritten as necessity. Memory could be edited into silence. Soldiers could be bought into loyalty. Officials could be trained into obedience. A mother could be forced to stand beside the son who destroyed the other. And once that happened, murder changed shape. It stopped being only an act of violence. It became a test. Who would speak? Who would lower their eyes? Who would accept the new version of the truth? Rome watched. Rome measured. Rome remembered who adjusted quickly. That is why the room matters. Not because it was the first Roman murder. It was not. Not because brothers had never fought for power. They had. The room matters because it showed how far the imperial system could bend around a crime without breaking. A son died. A mother stayed. A brother ruled. The army ate. The Senate bowed. The stones forgot. And Rome continued. That was the lesson. Power did not need innocence. It needed acceptance. It needed repetition. It needed everyone to wake up the next morning and behave as if the impossible had become normal. Caracalla had survived the room. He had survived Geta. He had survived the silence. For years, Rome moved under the shape he forced upon it. But a man who teaches the empire that blood can become order should never believe the lesson belongs only to him. In 217, far from the room where his brother died, Caracalla was murdered among soldiers, not in his mother's arms, not under the protection of family, not with Rome stopping to ask what kind of son he had been. The machine kept moving.
One son died in my arms. The other died beyond my reach. Rome called both events politics.
Julia Domna did not build the next lie. But another woman of the Severan house was watching, Julia Mesa. She understood what the room had proved. An emperor did not need a clean claim. He needed a story the army would repeat, a name people could be made to say, a body the soldiers could lift into power, and soon from Syria she would manufacture an emperor from a boy, because Rome had already learned the method. Truth was optional. Acceptance was everything. And the next Severan lie was waiting to be born.